Welcome to Planet People, a podcast that aims to inspire curiosity and cultivate a deeper connection with the natural world. I'm Natalie Jane, a conservation biologist, eco-communicator, and the host of this podcast series. And I am thrilled to be sharing stories with you that highlight the beauty and importance of protecting our planet's wildlife. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Planet People. I am so excited to be here in La Jolla, California, where we're recording at the Wedding Bowl, which is a beautiful venue overlooking the ocean. So if you hear waves or birds in the background, please welcome those sounds in as we really try to incorporate nature to really get excited about Planet People and what it means to connect with nature. And we get to do that right here during this episode. So I am super stoked to be introducing our guest, Daina Buchner. Welcome to the show, Daina. We are so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm looking at a bunch of wildlife right now, so great location.
It is a really magical place. We're really lucky to be recording here, and I hope our listeners welcome these sounds in because I find it very relaxing. And yeah, it's just a lovely day. We're excited. We're happy to be here. Oh, the oyster catchers!
Yeah, they
Oh
were.
my
I wonder if it's the oyster
gosh!
catchers that have nested at
I love
Children's
them.
Pool.
There's another one. You saw them nesting there?
Over the winter, there was a pair nesting at Children's Pool.
Oh, I didn't see the nest.
Yeah, they were like on that big rock.
No way.
Yeah.
I've never seen the nest, but I have seen that pair often.
I mean, maybe it wasn't a nest, but
They're my
nice.
favorite seabirds. I love
really?
oyster catchers.
Oh,
Yes,
they're really
that bright
cool.
orange bill is
Yeah.
just so vibrant. And they're such funny parents. They're like helicopter parents.
Really?
They just love to like hover. And they're so like anxious sounding. I don't know. Maybe I'm anthropomorphizing a little, but they're
That's
really
fine.
cute.
I do that.
But anyways, in our last episode, we had a vulture come behind us and we saw it with a snake in its talons.
No way.
Yeah. We were like, what? That's why we have our binoculars, because then we can just look at anything that comes by. And, you know, it's okay that there are seabirds around us. They're pooping on us, and it means good luck, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. It's good luck. Coral got pooped on earlier, but it was pretty funny. So Daina is a conservation videographer and photographer, photographing all kinds of marine mammals, from gray whales to humpback whales. Her work has been featured on some really well-known platforms like National Geographic, PBS, USA Today, Shark Week, Apple TV, and I'm sure I'm missing a few, but your credentials are extremely impressive, and we're so excited to have you aboard the episode today. So why don't you share with our listeners how your love for wildlife really got started and how that led to where you are today?
As you said, I'm a wildlife conservation photographer, and I mainly focus now on underwater and drone, but primarily drone. And I've shifted a bit from photography to videography over the years. I do some what we call in the underwater world topside, which is basically just photography on land or on a boat. But my primary focus now is drone videography. I have been lucky enough to be featured in a handful of different publications and documentaries that have been shown on National Geographic, USA Today, Apple TV, Shark Week, and a bunch of other ones.
Amazing. What are some early childhood memories that sparked your love for animals?
My curiosity and interest in wildlife really started at a young age. From the time I remember, I've always been obsessed with animals. So I grew up with a bunch of cats, and my dad's a retired veterinarian, so I think just having that access to, his veterinary practice gave me a lot of exposure to animals at a young age. But I've also been very drawn to the underwater world despite growing up in the Midwest. I have some really fun, and some of my favorite childhood memories are when we would go to Michigan and I would swim in the lake or snorkel in the lake. Just having this fascination of being in the water from a young age.
That's really special that you were able to have those experiences in the Midwest where you're landlocked, but you're still able to find these outlets to get in the water, go to Michigan, swim in the lakes, have these really early on childhood memories that seem to have quite an impact on your trajectory today with spending time snorkeling in those lakes. And now you're doing that here out west in San Diego, in Baja, in Hawaii. I know we have so many places you'll take us in this episode, and it's really fascinating that your early childhood experiences shaped your conservation ethos today.
Yeah, and it's really fun to think about some of these memories, and one that sticks out in particular from my childhood as it relates to the ocean. I actually have two. One of them is when my family and I went to Florida for vacation. We didn't usually go on family vacations other than to like areas in the Midwest, but we went to Florida one year and I went snorkeling for the first time in a body of water that wasn't a lake, and I couldn't believe how magical the underwater world was in the ocean. There's just so much life in there, from the corals and the fish and just different animals in the water, and just thinking about the world that lived below the surface. That was a memory that like really seared into my brain from a young age. That kind of fed my obsession with the ocean to a degree. I also think there's other contributors like the Little Mermaid movie, as well as Lisa Frank and all of her beautiful illustrations that made dolphins and the ocean look so beautiful. This is another, it's kind of a funny memory, but I remember in elementary school, we were studying the ocean, or like it was like our marine science portion of science class. And I was like, this is so cool, I love this. Like at the time I wanted to be a marine biologist anyway. And I remember the local like WTTW, it's basically PBS, but it's a local like public channel. And I remember that they were having an episode about the ocean. And I was like, oh sweet, I'm gonna record this and I'm gonna bring it into school. It's gonna be so cool. And I didn't watch the entire episode for whatever, it may have just like been too late for me and I had to go to bed. But I just remember I brought this tape in to my teacher because I told her about this. I'm like, there's this episode and I'm gonna record it and bring it in. She's like, cool. So I bring it into school and we're watching it, and there's this one moment where it's this fish that uses a sea cucumber for protection, but the way that they use a sea cucumber for protection is when they feel threatened, they will go into the anus of a sea cucumber. And I'm sitting here. We're sitting here watching this episode, and they're like saying the word anus over and over again. I'm like, oh my God, I was so mortified. Just another example of how obsessed I was with the ocean. I wanted to just share.
That's so funny.
Share these cool.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Wow, it seems like there are a lot of just little tidbits in your early childhood that have clearly shaped your passion project to love the ocean today. And it's not just a project, it's just a way of life, loving the ocean,
Yes.
really. And it's cool that you said you wanted to be a marine biologist, and even though you have a different full-time job, you still didn't let that stop you from taking action and following your childhood love of the ocean. And those influences are so important early in your life, and connecting back to that as an adult is so refreshing. It's like you're like reliving this little version of yourself, and you just want to hold your hand from an adult, like as if you were a child, bringing her with you into this life today and showing her like, I still love the ocean. You know, it's like a visual, like full circle moment that I love. And that's one of my favorite questions that I ask guests on the show. It's such an important part of who you are.
It is. My inner child would be so impressed with what I do today.
Your inner child would be so stoked for you right now.
Exactly.
That you are interviewing for a podcast about why you love the ocean.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. So it sounds like these childhood memories really have carried you forward into this next part of your life where you've moved from the Midwest to San Diego and followed your love for the ocean. How did that transition into conservation photography? Like how you got started in drone videography and what led you to get to that point in your passion?
Yeah, I'm so excited to be able to share this passion with everyone that listens to the podcast. I started about 5 years ago with drone, but before that I did underwater photography and videography, which I still do, not as much as drone. But I used photography as a creative outlet in high school, and that largely went neglected in college to a degree. But I ended up in 2013, after a few years of just being more interested in doing travel photography, I started a blog and my Instagram. And I was using that as a way to inspire people to, show that even if you have a full-time job, you can travel and be, living your best life and exploring the world. And then over the years, I've transitioned over into more wildlife conservation and educating people about our impacts on nature and what it means for the wildlife, and very specifically to marine wildlife. And my main focus tends to be around gray whales, humpback whales, and sea turtles.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. What changed your ethos? You mentioned getting started with photography through kind of a travel lens, but I know you've always had a love for wildlife. So when did you decide to transition into wanting to do more of an educational conservation focus with your marine wildlife photography?
It's a really great question. I think it came at a point where I was doing a lot of self-reflection with how I'd approached photography, and I started my blog, and it was a travel blog, and it was meant to help people, better prepare for traveling to specific destinations, and that morphed into adventure travel. But I started seeing a trend in social media on how the prevalence of people sharing this material and content online was having a negative impact on really fragile ecosystems that weren't equipped to handle the influx of people that were visiting as a direct result of social media. So that kind of turned me off to the travel focus. I felt like I wasn't contributing a positive impact in the world, essentially. Is it really helpful or hurtful to share these these things with traveling?
Right.
So I kind of reevaluated what I wanted to do with social media and my blog, and I took a shift to start educating people on the impacts that their actions have on nature and wildlife. And it was still a little rooted in travel at that point, but then I eventually just made a full shift to wildlife conservation pretty quickly, because the impact that I was looking to have on people, and I didn't know it at the time until it kind of happened, is when people are seeing these unique animals in nature and not knowing these things about them that I'm educating them about, or things that they can do in their daily life to help protect animals, just taking small actions. It doesn't have to be a heavy lift to contribute to conservation efforts.
Of course.
And just taking small steps. I really think that one of the things I've learned through all of this, and one thing that I try and carry within my conservation approach, is trying to meet people where they're at, because it can be really overwhelming thinking about all the things that we need to do to help, conserve nature and protect the planet. But when you can break it down to smaller daily things that, are pretty low effort, then it becomes a little less overwhelming, but you're still making an impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you make a good point in addressing how to be helpful versus harmful, and differentiating between those two things, especially with the social media presence, is very important. How you present yourself through a conservation approach, like you said, and there's a lot of value in that, and I admire that you recognized, back in 2018, that there needed to be a shift, especially because we are loving our places to death with these geotags. And I remember there was a Vox article or some sort of headline that had that, we are loving our wild places to death, and how can we prevent that? How can we be helpful versus harmful? And I think you make a great point in meeting people halfway, and that you can take small actions and breaking it down so it doesn't feel so overwhelming for the general public who may not know those best practices, and that they need to understand that you don't need to be a scientist to take those actionable steps. And I actually find that most of our guests on the show aren't scientists, because a lot of scientists are busy collecting data and writing research and publishing their research, and that all stays in an academic echo chamber. And in fact, most academic publications, I think 10% of them are read by the non-academic audiences. So that just goes to show that there can be this kind of gatekeeping ideas within the scientific community, and it's like, well, is our research going beyond the academic institution? Is it helping create laws that will protect animals? Are we educating the general public with these publications so that people know to take these actionable steps? I find that a lot of conservationists who are taking action, yes, are scientists, but are people like you, who are photographers, are naturalists, are enthusiasts, and who want to be helpful and see that there is harm being done, and what can we do to prevent that from happening. And I think your story perfectly encapsulates that vision and that transition from childhood to adulthood, and that you don't have to have it be your full-time job to make a difference. So thank you so much for making that vision come to life and sharing your stories with us. I feel so passionately about sharing your story and other people's, because it's people like you who can make a difference and that are truly a planet person to the core.
I really love hearing that, because it is truly just trying to help people understand what they can do in a way that they understand.
Meeting them halfway.
Yeah, meeting them halfway.
Totally.
Within living in San Diego, marine wildlife is so easily accessible to us. It was a smooth transition for me to be able to experiment in that area. And I've found that has been really fulfilling, and just being able to reach people that don't have this access to the types of animals that I'm seeing. I sometimes forget that it's not the norm for most people in the world. So that's a general overview of how I got into marine conservation photography.
Absolutely. I can understand wanting to put out material to the world that feels fulfilling for yourself, because you know you have a passion and a love for these whales or sea turtles or whatever it is that you're photographing, and sharing that is a form of passion in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And wanting to
Absolutely.
show people that these places are accessible, and especially in San Diego, the marine wildlife is very biodiverse. It's a biodiversity hotspot, with La Jolla Cove hosting all kinds of different species, from sharks to rays to gray whales, which I know you had a really cool encounter with back in 2020, and I'm excited to get into some of those stories that you have just from all of your photography experience. And I know you mentioned when we were talking earlier that you got into photography first doing underwater photography, and that was through scuba diving or free diving?
It was mainly free diving at the time. I
Okay.
was actually not scuba certified when I got into underwater photography.
That's impressive
Yeah.
that you started underwater photography free diving. I mean,
Yeah.
what's your breath hold like to be able to do that? That's pretty intense.
It's surprisingly, the dynamic breath hold of mine is not very long. I would say I can hold it for up to a minute at a time. There's people that are way beyond that. My static breath hold, my max was 3 minutes and 15 seconds. So that's when you're not moving and you're holding your breath underwater with your face in the water.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what the difference
Yeah,
static
so
or-
dynamic is when
okay,
you're moving
dynamic.
around,
Sure.
and static is when you're just completely still.
Okay.
You practice static breath holds to help you have the mammalian reflex that is triggered when water hits your face. At a certain point, your body is going to tell you that you need to breathe, but you technically don't have to for a certain period of time. So you just have to train your brain to fight that urge to breathe when you're underwater.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that static breath hold, is that where the photography began then? If you were just underwater being still?
No. Yeah, good question. I kind of just took us off on a random path there. I had this moment where I borrowed a friend's GoPro for a vacation I took to Dominica. I knew it was a good action camera. This was back in 2014, so I think it was like the second or third generation of GoPro, so nothing too fancy at that point. And I did a bunch of water activities and snorkeling on that trip, and it kind of just created this realization that I could start exploring photography in a different way, because going underwater is like going into a completely different world. But it wasn't until a few years later that I became more serious about underwater photography, and I upgraded from my GoPro to an underwater housing with a camera in it. So that was back in 2017. and that was all free diving. Nothing, and I didn't get scuba certified until I think 2019. So it was like 2 years later I got scuba certified because I wanted to start doing that while scuba diving.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's really cool. What is it like carrying that equipment underwater? Because underwater housings are pretty big, right?
Yeah.
I've never used one, so I don't know what it's like. But
it depends on what your setup is. So there's
Okay.
some people that have massive setups. Mine's pretty compact, so it's not too bad. You do get a little fatigue in your arms, but at this point I've decided that I prefer doing ambient light. So instead of relying on artificial lights that you would need to set up on your camera, the majority of my underwater photography is within the first atmosphere of water, so like the first 15 to 30 feet of water, because that's where the light's the best. And once you start getting lower, one, you need a better breath hold, and two, you need to be equipped with better lighting.
Cool. Okay. So what were some of the most exciting creatures that you captured in those first few years of getting really into this underwater photography passion of yours? Because it seems like it's been life-changing for you. I know it's sort of a side project for you now, and your Instagram page is definitely one that I followed and kept up with for a while now. So it is really exciting to have you in the Planet People Network, and we're really happy to have you on the interview. So it's cool.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I always get excited when I meet people that have followed me for a while, as a side note.
Hey, it's a form of flattery. Like, you have amazing stories and footage, and it's great that you're putting yourself out there, because it's not easy to do that, to just get started and to share what you're passionate about, and you're doing it, so that's great.
Yeah, sometimes it can be uncomfortable, but
It can be. It is still.
We can get back to that.
Yeah.
But I would say
Yeah, I forgot what my question was, honestly.
it was kind of
A
going
light
into
bulb
the
moment.
light bulb moment.
Yeah. What was the most exciting creature that you captured in those first few years that made you feel like, okay, I want to keep doing this?
So I hope people don't hate me for this. Right after I had upgraded for my underwater equipment from GoPro to my housing, I took a trip to the Kingdom of Tonga.
Where's
and
that?
That is in the South Pacific.
Wow.
It is, I don't know exactly where it is in relation to the other South Pacific islands, but you fly into New Zealand, and then it's like a couple-hour flight from New Zealand.
Wow.
It's a pretty interesting place. It's not a place that goes out of its way to support tourism in the traditional sense, but what's really special about the Kingdom of Tonga, besides the culture that they've maintained, is the migration of humpback whales that go to the lagoons to birth their babies. They go to protected lagoons in Vava'u and other areas. They're heavily regulated tours to be able to get in the water with humpback whales.
Okay.
So I went there in 2017 and went on one of these trips. The first trip I get into the water, I'm sliding out of the outrigger that I'm in, and there's a mom humpback and a baby humpback. We're staying behind the guide, and the calf breaks away from its mom and swims directly towards me.
Oh my gosh.
And I swear we made eye contact. And
Wow.
at this point, I'm not even worried about if I'm getting the shot. Like, I had just learned what settings to use for this specific photography, and I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna happen. I have my GoPro going for video, which I didn't actually get any GoPro video that was usable. But I'm holding my camera down and just firing off my camera.
Sure.
And having this moment of connection with this humpback calf was just so remarkable, because you could just feel the curiosity coming off of this baby, wondering what I am and what I'm doing in the water with it. And just as fast as it started, it decided, you know what, I'm done, and it turned away and just swam away. I ended up getting some pretty good photos from that, which I entered into the San Diego County Fair and got third place for underwater photography that year.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
Thanks. And I entered it into Nature Photographer of the Year for National Geographic. And I didn't get any placement, but I was featured one of the weeks, because they do, like, every week the editor does their
that's
pick.
so cool.
And I was featured one week. So that was really cool. But that moment,
Nat Geo moment.
yeah, like, I just realized how just like
Magical.
Yeah, it's magical, and people are talking about how you hear these stories about how whales are smart and they have feelings and they're
Intuition.
sentient. Yeah, intuition, all this, and it's like, of course, like I'm an animal lover, so I believe it. But then I experienced this, and at that point, I was like, okay, this is the direction I want to take my photography. So at that point, I was very focused on photography still, and then a few years later is when I got into the drone side of things and transitioned more into video.
Okay. So it began really then with you using a GoPro on this snorkeling trip.
Yeah.
In the Dominican Republic, you said?
Dominica.
Dominica, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then that transitioned into you doing more free diving, eventually scuba diving, and you got your underwater housing gear.
Mm-hmm.
And now you are an FAA certified drone pilot, right?
Yes.
So tell our listeners what FAA stands for.
FAA stands for the Federal Aviation Administration.
Okay.
And it is the governing body that regulates the skies in the United States. So there's different designations for airspace, but generally they regulate what can occur in the air.
Okay.
So drone pilots are regulated by the FAA, regardless if you're just considered a recreational drone pilot or a commercial drone pilot. We all have to follow the same guidelines and rules.
Okay.
It's kind of like the rules of the road when you're driving.
Oh, cool.
That's probably the easiest equivalent. The main difference, though, with a recreational drone pilot and a commercial drone pilot is the commercial drone pilot goes through additional knowledge gathering stage. Essentially, you have to pass a test it's actually very hard and similar to a pilot's license test, and you have to learn a lot about flying a plane. But you have to pass a test that the FAA has you take, and then you can be a licensed pilot. And what that allows you to do is fly for your business, for a commercial reason. So if you want to make money with it, or if you intend to use it in any shape or form that would be tied to a business, then you need to have a commercial license. Oftentimes, if I license my videos or certain organizations that I partner with, they will require that they'll ask if I'm licensed, and if I'm not, which I am, they wouldn't want to use my work.
Okay, good to know. Does anyone who flies a drone need to be FAA certified?
They don't have to get their Part 107 license unless they want to do commercial activity. So that means essentially if you plan to make money from it, you need to be licensed.
Okay.
There's different designations for like permitting. So if you, based on the weight of your drone, you have to register your drone with the FAA. So if it's over 249 grams, or it's like milligrams, I don't know, grams or milligrams, you have to register it with the FAA. It costs $5, and you don't have to renew that unless you get a new drone that's above 249 grams. Anything below that, if you're going to be a recreational drone pilot, you don't have to register it.
So you don't have to be certified with
No,
FAA? Yeah.
They do require, there's like this quiz for any recreational drone pilot to take now. I think it's about 10 questions, and you can take it as many times as you need to pass. So until you get 100%, they just want people to understand the basic laws of, you can only fly up to 400 feet. Don't fly over crowds of people, things like that, to keep things safe, as drone piloting is becoming more and more popular.
It is becoming more popular. I see people flying their drones all over La Jolla Cove, and I've even heard of stories where, sometimes the drone will actually drop, and there was a colony of terns up in Orange County where a drone fell into the colony, and every single bird abandoned their
nest. Yeah,
that's what we don't want.
No, we do not want that.
So how do you practice ethical drone photography or videography when you are capturing these photos of marine wildlife?
So while there's not any official regulation from the FAA around this, or NOAA, or any organization really, I look to NOAA and the Marine Mammal Protection Act to give me some guidance on how to act in these circumstances. My rule that I follow is generally if I find that I can visually see that I'm disturbing the animal, I'll back off immediately. Sure. It depends on the species, obviously. Some are more sensitive than others. I don't think I would ever fly over a colony of birds,
Sure.
just because they view drones as like generally a predator, and if I'm doing research, fine, but that's not my direction. But I try and follow just best practices laid out by NOAA and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, as well as, you know, wildlife viewing best practices as well.
So let's say you maybe in the past with your drone have gotten close to an animal. What is their response if they do recognize the drone presence, and how do you know when to back off? Like, what is the animal telling you intuitively, you know?
Yeah, so with whales, they don't generally really recognize that there's a drone there that I've observed. I tend not to fly under 50 feet just
Okay.
because, you know, that's the
Best practice.
best practice. And when you think of the acoustics of a drone going through the water, they're probably not going to hear it as loud as, you know,
That's a good
you would
point.
above water. When it comes to species like sea lions and harbor seals, following the guidance of if you notice the sea lion or seal looking at what is in their vicinity and looking at your drone, that's considered harassment, and I back off. But I don't do it immediately because that could also freak them out, so I back off slowly until I notice that they're not, you know, looking at my drone and trying to figure out what it is.
Totally.
I have seen dolphins in the water
Oh, cool.
looking up
Okay.
at my drone.
Oh, really?
They'll swim on the side
Yeah.
and look up.
Oh, wow. So they're curious too.
They are, and sharks have been spooked by my drone, but
Okay.
they'll see the shadow behind
Oh,
them, and then
yeah.
they swim off
Sure.
really fast. But generally, I just follow, you know, if you're viewing wildlife on land, I try and follow those practices, and maybe even to a more strict degree, just because it's a louder thing and something that's probably pretty new to them still.
Definitely. Yeah, it's probably a pretty foreign object to an animal like a dolphin that's just swimming in their pod through the ocean and they're looking up like, what is that,
Yeah.
right? No, it's definitely important, and we advocate for that on the podcast. We've had a few other photographers on, or naturalists who like to do photography on the side kind of thing. And we always ask them similar questions like, what are your best practices? How can we share with our listeners who maybe want to pick up photography and share with their own audience, right? And do it in an ethical way.
Right.
And especially being right here in La Jolla, where we are so blessed to have marine mammals that we can view from shore, including harbor seals and the California sea lion,
Yeah.
which we know all too well from a couple of past episodes, especially with the Seal Society, and they've talked to us about, you know, how there is encroachment on wildlife, and to use your camera lens because that's what it's there for.
Right.
And you don't need to get right up to the animal and take a selfie with them. And I think the biggest thing is, you've mentioned this yourself, that if the animal notices your presence and they are looking at you and stopping what they're doing, they are exerting energy that they could be using to nurse their young or go to forage for food. And so it's really is following ethical viewing guidelines, best practices, no touching the animals, obviously. And that's something we talked about too, staying a bus length away when you are viewing. If you ever do have the chance to come to La Jolla, make sure you do view these marine mammals from a bus length away, right? So that's super important, and it's honestly not just a best practice through the NOAA guidelines, but it's about being a planet person. And we do advocate for that because it's like a conservation best practice, right? If we want to learn how to coexist with these animals and treat them with respect, then we need to observe them without invading their space, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because if we start, you know, encroaching in their space, harassing them, trying to get these selfies with our phones and disturbing their peace, they're going to leave. And that is going to take away what's so special about, you know, specifically to La Jolla, these animals that come here to birth their babies and
Migrate through, rest here, whatever it might be.
I take it two approaches. One is understanding that it took me a long time to get to the place that I'm at. And I have to remind myself that I've learned this over years and years of doing this. Right. Even starting out, just learning what lenses you need to use. I started off with a wide angle lens, and then getting into telephoto photography, it's just like a totally foreign concept. You see these photos online and you're like, oh my God, they're so close to the animals. But realistically, they're not, because these lenses are so powerful that it creates this perception that they're closer.
Right, and maybe that perception is what leads just the general public to think that that's the type of photo they can also capture.
Exactly. And I always try and comment when I do have instances like that in my descriptions online, or when I'm sharing these moments, I outline, I took this photo with a telephoto lens, and I'll share the length of that lens and what it was at, so people can kind of start, maybe they won't fully understand that, but they'll see that it wasn't just my camera phone that I zoomed in or got really close to the animal.
What kind of gear do you use to get these shots for videos and photos?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the equipment that I use a handful of different cameras. So for underwater photography, I have a Sony mirrorless camera. It's the A6500. It is a discontinued camera, but its predecessor, I think, is a 6600 or something. It's part of that line, and it's a really great camera for people to actually get started in photography. It's a small, compact, interchangeable lens camera, but it's budget friendly, and I'm still using it. Like, this is the camera I'm still using today for underwater stuff. And it's in a Nauticam housing. So the Nauticam housing is a little pricey, but there are other manufacturers for underwater housings that you can use. If you are interested in pursuing underwater housings, just keep in mind that you need to buy a housing as well as a lens port. So there's a lot of technical knowledge that you can find online, YouTube videos that can help you understand the nuance of the different pieces you would need for an underwater housing. For my drone work, it's a DJI Mavic 3. This is a really great intermediate to professional style drone, but it's very much it's super portable. It's more affordable than the Inspire, which one day maybe I'll have one of those, but I don't know, they're pretty expensive. And DJI I love them. They're super easy to learn, but you definitely want to read up based on your local laws, what your best practices and regulations you have to follow, because you are, as a drone pilot in the United States, you have to follow guidelines set forth by the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration. And then I have a topside camera when I take photography on land or on boat, and that's another Sony mirrorless camera. And I have a variety of lenses I mainly shoot wildlife with what I call telephoto or a long lens, and that gives you focal distances that are significantly further than what you can see with your naked eye. So a lot of it is just a lot of research if you're interested in it. I also have a list of the equipment that I use on my website. So if anyone's curious about that, they can poke on there.
Great, we'll plug that at the end. Cool. How does your photography lend itself to sharing your conservation message?
A picture's worth 1,000 words, and even now, with video, video's so powerful to be able to demonstrate animals in their natural habitat. And
absolutely,
that's what is so powerful about drone videography, is we're able to see glimpses of these animals in their natural world, going about their daily life, their migration,
undisturbed.
whatever it is, completely undisturbed. That in itself is really powerful and strong, because a lot of people won't be able to see that in their lifetime unless they have access to it online.
Absolutely.
So I think that's one of the pieces, is just being able to help people see these animals where they're living, to help build that connection.
Absolutely.
That, okay, I learned about this in a book or whatever, but now I can actually see it in practice and just see how special it is. That's what, at least I'm hoping, is the impact of my work.
No, that's beautiful. I love that message, because you can't care about what you don't know about.
Right.
And if we don't know about these animals in their natural environment, then how are we going to learn how to conserve them? And so with photography and videography, it opens up this world for people that maybe don't live by the coast. And there are plenty of people that don't. We're very lucky in San Diego to have such cool access to all of this marine wildlife. And sharing that with a wider audience helps people to understand that we can have an ocean full of life and we can protect it. And if we don't see that life, how will we know that it needs protection?
Exactly.
And it does need protection, and there are individual actions that we can take every day, and I know that's a major ethos for you in promoting your photography and just showcasing to people, this is important. We need to preserve our oceans, our marine life, and all of these amazing whales that have made such a comeback that were on the brink of extinction.
Yeah.
We're really lucky that there are laws in place like the Marine Mammal Protection Act that ended whaling. Humpbacks almost went extinct not even less than 100 years ago.
Yeah, they had an extraordinary comeback story. Into the 1900s, there was whaling going on. And I read this book called The Four Fish, The Last Wild Food. And it talks about our relationship with eating seafood and things like that. But one aspect of that book that was really interesting is they talked about how one of the things that led to protection of whales was a Supreme Court case where they changed the definition of whale from a fish to something else. But I can't remember the specific details.
Change the rights of the animal
Right,
to
yeah.
allow for more protections.
Yeah, so it was like, we need to stop whale, and this was like in the 1970s. Like this was,
It wasn't that long ago.
wasn't that
it was
long
50
ago.
years ago,
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
So we are so lucky to have laws in place that protect marine mammals. Specifically, one that we've already referenced earlier is the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and for short, that's MMPA. And we're very grateful that this is in place because we've seen species come back from the brink of extinction, like the gray whale, which is a huge conservation success story. It was almost hunted to near extinction in the 17 and 1800s as they were hunted extensively for oil, meat, and their baleen. But due to the MMPA, we've seen them rebound. They were once in the hundreds, which is crazy. That is crazy. And now their numbers are up to 20 to 25,000, which is a major comeback for this incredible, resilient animal. I mean, I am shocked that they were at one point in the hundreds.
I know. It's crazy to think about.
They could have gone extinct
Yeah.
if we hadn't ended whaling. And whaling practices weren't even outlawed until when? The 50s or 60s, I think? Maybe even the 70s?
Yeah.
We'll have to fact check that. But
I know, it's pretty recent that whaling was outlawed. When you think about how recent whaling ended, you can think about it in terms of the length of a gray whale's life. So there are gray whales that still are alive, theoretically,
Sure.
that experience whaling. So when you see that you're able to visit their birthing and mating lagoons, and these whales have essentially welcomed you into their space, despite how humans have treated them in the past, it's pretty remarkable.
that is remarkable. And I know there has been some talk of gray whales in the news, specifically because of some unusual mortality events in the last few years. If you want to speak to that, what happened to gray whales in the last 5 years that has caused a rather significant decline? I think, 5,000 to 7,000 whales have been observed perishing, right?
Right, yeah, so these unusual mortality events basically signify a drastic decline in the population of a species. Scientists aren't certain on what's causing it. It could be a number of factors, the ice melting in the Arctic, which limits their food supply, to it could just end up being a boom and bust years for species. So scientists aren't super certain what is leading to this unusual mortality event, but they have been tracking it because they've noticed a few in recent decades. But
There's no way climate change can have an impact on their prey availability, number one, because they are baleen whales, so that means they feed with their keratin-like plates, right?
Yes.
They're in the Mysticidae family, so I kind of like to remember that because like mustache,
Oh, yeah.
Mysticidae, they don't have teeth like other toothed whales, like
Right.
orcas or dolphins. And so those keratin plates allow them to filter through things like krill. And when that becomes unavailable to them, then the whole food chain crashes. And there seems to be this pattern with climate change and Arctic sea ice melting with a decline of those smaller fish species like krill, or I know they feed on crustaceans, mussels, shrimp, all that. And when those disappear, there is definitely a crash in their population for gray whales.
Yes.
But I know that scientists can't for sure say that's the only reason. But I mean, the sea ice is melting, their food chain is
Declining,
changing,
yeah.
things are changing.
exactly, yeah. Their feeding patterns are really interesting. When they do eat crustaceans, they scoop it up from the bottom of the ocean. So, maybe that requires some certain level of temperature for the crustaceans to live in that specific area.
Definitely.
And with the sea ice melting, maybe they're moving to a different location and the gray whales haven't found them, or they're just, the food supply's dying.
It's really hard to track whale migration in general, and I think that's why this unusual mortality event there hasn't been a dedicated reason as to why there's been strandings or just perishing of calves. And it's just because in my opinion, the technology isn't advanced enough. I mean, we've only been tracking them and their success, right, and the rebounds, at least up until this mortality event, in the last 50 years.
Right.
Since the Marine Mammal Protection Act has shown that we've seen an increase in these animals, but how do we really know what's going on the bottom of the seafloor and where these smaller prey items are going? And how is the Arctic sea ice melting and the ocean temperature changing impacting this food system? So it only makes sense that bigger animals like baleen whales, humpbacks, gray whales, and then we have rorquals. And I believe that humpback whales are part of the rorquals, but gray whales and right whales are not. But anyways, that's a little bit more technical.
Like, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I just recently learned that, so it's okay.
I think the success story is around how we can actually prove that by reducing human interference, we can show a positive rebound. But then there's this unusual mortality event, which we can't pinpoint. We don't know what the direct cause is, and it's hard
Right.
to pinpoint that.
I like your framing on that, though, because it demonstrates this coexistence element that humans were clearly disrespecting these animals during an intensive whaling period.
Yeah.
And once we remove the threat of us, what can happen? These animals can be restored. We can learn to respect them. We can learn to coexist with them. And so I think, yeah, to your point about this unusual mortality event, it is unusual because it's natural causes. But is it human-induced causes with climate change and the melting of the sea ice? So that's where we're still interfering with the success of the species. But overall, in terms of the conservation success and optimism, it is a major comeback. I mean,
It is.
the fact that they were in the hundreds and are now, between 15 to 20,000,
Yeah.
we're still on the up and up.
Yeah, when you think about their gestation period is a year, and then they're with their baby for a year, and they don't give birth every year, so it's
Wow.
a huge multiplication of gray whales.
Absolutely. And speaking of gray whales, you've had some pretty spectacular encounters with these animals here in San Diego and down to Baja California Sur.
Yes.
Why don't you share with our listeners some of those really incredible stories and how you have just had firsthand experiences with gray whales? What has that been like?
It's been amazing. So my very first taste of the magic of gray whales was in 2020, and I was still relatively new to being a drone pilot. I had been flying for about a year and a half at that point, and I was like 6 months a commercial pilot license. And a friend had tipped me off to a gray whale that was near shore, near Black's Beach in La Jolla. La Jolla is just so amazing, just a side note. So they tipped me off, and I almost didn't go that day, but I ended up going down to fly my drone to see if maybe I could catch this gray whale really close to shore. The clarity was really nice that day, so who doesn't want to see a gray whale in shallow water in San Diego? What ended up happening is when I put my drone up, I found the whale, and almost immediately when I found the whale, it started swimming into the surf line up at Black's Beach. And I have footage of this gray whale going through the surf line up at Black's Beach, kind of rolling around in the surf. And the surfers have no idea that it's there. Some of them, I think, may have seen it, but thought it was something else.
Wow.
So that was my first taste, which was really amazing.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And then
So you did capture.
I did. I got video of that. That's one of the first pieces of video that I was able to license. I licensed to a documentary that's on Apple TV called Big Beasts. It's a gray whale
that's
episode.
amazing. Congratulations on the
thanks.
feature.
Thank
That's so
you.
cool.
Yeah, super exciting about that. And funny side story is one of the people that was in the water that day, they reached out to me because I posted it to Instagram, and World Surf League picked it up, Surfline picked it up, and it went semi-viral. So a bunch of people in San Diego saw it, and there was a surf photographer in the water that day with the gray whale, and he reached out to me and it said, "That's me in the photo," like, because I had photos and video. And I asked him if he knew that it was there, if he knew that the whale was there, and he said, "I knew that there was something in the water, but I thought it was a shark, so I got out." And I was like, oh my God.
Wow, if only he knew it was a docile gray whale.
Yeah.
Because they are pretty docile, right?
Oh, yeah. They're docile, but they do have the nickname devilfish for a reason.
Explain that nickname. I've never heard that before.
So it's related to the days of whaling, not to go
Okay.
back there, but essentially whalers would come and hunt in the lagoons in Baja, and the mothers would defend their babies, so much so that they would completely destroy the rowboats that were going to hunt the whales and killing people. So they received
Wow.
the nickname of devilfish because
Well,
they're so
just
protective.
protecting themselves.
Exactly. So,
Wow.
but generally they are very just chill
It's cool.
animals, you know, minding their business.
Sure.
Some people, I know some of my friends call them the sea pickle because of their
That's
shape.
so funny. They kind of do have that shape.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
really awkward shape.
They are an awkward shape. No offense, gray whales.
Yeah.
You're still
We
beautiful.
still love you, yeah.
That's really cool. So you've had some pretty awesome encounters in San Diego.
Yeah.
Where else have you seen gray whales?
I have taken a journey down to the lagoons in Baja,
Okay.
specifically San Ignacio Lagoon. And what's really special about these lagoons is that there are designated zones that Mexico, it's heavily regulated. I just want to preface this because the best practice with wildlife is to never touch wildlife.
Of course.
But these lagoons are where gray whales migrate to be able to birth and mate. And it's in the winter, but it's kind of like their summer vacation.
Okay.
They go there and they're just super...
Wintering grounds,
they're-
it's their
yeah,
summer.
It's their wintering grounds, yeah. So when they're in their migration pattern, they're just focused, trying to get down there. In the lagoons, they're really chill. So I went down there in 2019, I want to say. No. This was after 2022. So you could go there, and there are tours that you can take with, like, the Mexican government has helped with this, but it's mainly local driven, where they partner with local people that used to be fishermen, and now they run these tours and help, you know, connect people with.
Sounds like ethical ecotourism.
Yeah. And you can go to these lagoons, and the very special thing is, and I can go back and talk about all the protections that they have in place
Sure.
too, but it's super special because there's a certain percent of whales in those lagoons that have found that they enjoy interacting with the pangas, which are the boats that you take to go out on the lagoon. And they will bring their babies up to the boats. So what we did is there is a eco camp there. It is Pachico's ecotourism group, and I can go back to why I chose that one specifically.
Sure.
So they have like these little cabins that you can stay on. You're on the lagoon, and we were there for 3 days
Okay.
in total. So we spent 2 days on the water and then 3 days. So we went out on the water, I think 4 or 5 times.
Amazing.
The very first time we went out, we get into the observation zone, and almost immediately there was a mom and a calf gray whale near us, and you could kind of tell that the baby was kind of checking us out, but
Sure.
it seemed pretty just like hesitant. And the mom immediately came over to the boat and started interacting with the passengers on the boat. She was going to, like, literally going around the boat to the different passengers on the boat, like almost saying hello to everyone. And at the same time, the baby, the calf, realizes, oh, okay, I can do this too.
That's so
and
funny.
the baby comes up to the boat and is just having the time of its life, like going to everyone, like kind of splashing away, chomping its baleen and like squishing water out of its
my
mouth.
gosh.
And it stayed with the boat for, I want to say 20, 25 minutes. And the mom actually the mom had left the boat to let the baby do whatever, and she was just kind of resting. Like, I feel like the mom was kind of having us watch her baby while she was taking a nap. But she comes over, and then it was almost like a mom coming to a little child being like, hey, we have to go, like, we need to go take a nap.
Sure.
And then she pulled the baby away, and they went and, you know, went off and took a nap or whatever they did.
That's
And
amazing.
it was just, so incredible to have that experience. I like gray whales at that point, but like I mentioned, they're kind of like an awkward shape and they're not the most dynamic or like full of character whale that you like when you think of whales and humpbacks and just like how they jump out of the water and like slash. Gray whales do jump, but not very frequently.
They don't have the iconic tail fluke.
No,
flip, right?
yeah, it's just like they have short, stubby pectoral fins, so it's hard for them to get out of the water, and then
That's so funny.
everything about them is just kind of a little stumpy. But I fell in love with gray whales on that trip, and I haven't been back to the lagoon since, and I keep trying to make my way back to the lagoons, and I'm hoping that I can make that happen in the next couple of years.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like a once in a lifetime experience. I mean,
Oh yeah.
having up close encounters like that.
I know, and I had brought all my camera equipment with me, and I was
did you
like,
need it?
I was like, I was just like, no, I'm just gonna enjoy this, because that's one of the things when you do have these encounters with animals that are really special, but you are recording it, you get to enjoy it, but then there's like a piece of it where it kind of feel a little disconnected too.
Yeah, sure.
Because you're trying to make sure you're getting
Yeah.
but I was
being
just like, you know
present.
what, I'm just gonna enjoy this, and I don't know when I'm gonna do this again, so I don't care if I can
That's so cool.
get content out of this.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna enjoy it.
That's amazing. Wow. How long were you there for? Did you say you lived in Baja for a year?
So this was a trip before this was during a trip before I moved to Baja.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so where did you move to when you went back to Baja?
I moved down to a small town in Baja California Sur that's like an hour north of Cabo.
Okay.
It's like a little small farming town.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Is that where the lagoons are in Cabo?
No,
Or?
so the lagoons that I'm talking of are basically right in the middle of the peninsula.
Okay.
At the border of north. There's Baja California, which is Baja Norte.
Oh, okay.
There's 2 states, and then Baja California Sur is.
I
so
didn't
San
know they
Ignacio,
were 2 separate.
Yeah, there are, and there's multiple lagoons in Baja California that the gray whales go to. One of them is in Guerrero Negro, and it's called Ojo Libre, and that's where it's the closest to San Diego. I want to say it's right across the state line of the 2 states in Baja. And then there's San Ignacio Lagoon, which is an hour and a half south of that. And that's actually where there's this book called Lagoon Time, which is actually incredibly interesting. But there was a couple that were also scientists, and in the 70s they mapped the entire lagoon for San Ignacio, and they did I think it was the very initial gray whale survey, and counting the number of whales in the lagoon was in the 70s.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah, and one thing that I do want to come back to is I mentioned it before about the lagoons in Baja and how they're structured for this type of activity. The Mexican government has designated certain sections of a lagoon for you to be able to interact with gray whales in this way, and it's very much on the gray whale term, but they have cordoned off about, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's either 1/5 or 1/8 of a lagoon, of each of the lagoons. And that's where you can go to have these interactions. And then the whales have free reign throughout the whole lagoon. So they can go and, they're massive lagoons. It's not just like they're significantly large. It took us about an hour to get to the spot that we saw them. So when you enter the zone, there is a person that observes the area, multiple people, and you're limited in your time, so you get an hour and a half within the zone, and then once your hour and a half is up, you have to exit the zone. So it's meant to help reduce the number of boats that are in the zone at a time and the number of interactions that occur in a day. Like I said before, the gray whales can leave those zones. It's estimated that about 35% of these whales will go into that zone and have these interactions with the pangas.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
I can't believe you got to have that, really, up close encounter with them. Right next to the boat, you were able to see them. They came up, they were curious. And it's so fun seeing an animal be curious about us because we're curious about them. And that's something that we share a lot about on this podcast, is just curiosity for wildlife.
Yeah.
And wanting to share that curiosity with others to inspire action and hope and most importantly, stewardship, which is a huge mission for us. And I love that you carry that mission as part of your ethos. And And through your photography, you can give back, right? And show people what they need to care about so we can protect our ocean, planet ocean.
Exactly.
It's planet ocean. There's more ocean than there is land mass.
Yes.
Well, we're on the topic of stewardship and conservation and all things whales. Another amazing success story that we can share with our listeners is the humpback whale. That is a great story about a species, again, like the gray whale, coming back from the brink of extinction. But its story is similar to that of the gray whale, where we see the protections in place, like the Marine Mammal Protection Act, providing stronger protections and ending this ongoing whaling that was occurring throughout the 1900s. And whaling became harder and harder because there were fewer whales to harpoon. And attitudes started to shift, and specifically the World Wildlife Fund had this campaign called Save the Whales. And in 1982, this led to a moratorium that ended whaling. And that wasn't that long ago.
No.
1982? I mean,
It's
we're
42
lucky.
years ago.
Yeah, not that long ago that whaling ended. And the fact that we can see just these attitude shifts with the formation of the World Wildlife Fund's conservation campaign, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, all of these small shifts, well actually big shifts for a big animal, created a big success story. And these animals came back from the brink of extinction similar to the gray whale. So we're really lucky that we can rely on the law and campaigns to support these conservation efforts.
Yeah, I totally agree. It really just goes to show that nature just needs to be left alone.
Period.
And just let it do its thing, and it just shows how resilient it is as well. And it's so hopeful to hear these stories of how the humpback has rebounded and seeing how successful that has been.
It gives me a lot of hope. And in a world where we constantly have headlines about climate change, catastrophe, and of course it's important to know about the effects of climate change. I'm not trying to mitigate that at all, but we need to also focus on conservation optimism and success stories and good news and what can happen when we leave animals alone and when we put laws in place and moratoriums on fishing and whaling and ending harmful practices that don't respect the planet. And when we respect the planet, we can really encourage that coexistence. And you have done a great example of that by having these encounters with these animals. I mean, that up close and personal encounter with the humpback off of that island in New Zealand, like, what? That is so cool. I mean, you were just like, not obviously standing there, you were in the water, just statically underwater, observing them in their natural environment. That is respect, that is coexistence. And who knows, maybe without these protections and the campaigns, you might not have had that experience.
Right. That's very true. I mean, that's a really good thing to think about too, is I think it's a David Attenborough quote about, you know, do we want to leave, it's something to do with an elephant. I'm going to butcher it because I don't remember off the top of my head.
We can reference it later.
Yeah, but thinking about how our impact when we think about the humpback whale and putting these protections in place in the 1980s, and 42 years later, such a significant bounce back has been made that they've been taken off the at-risk list is incredible. And humpbacks are pretty cool as they are. It's an exciting story when it's for an animal that's so just charismatic as well.
They are so charismatic, and I know they're well known for breaching out of the water with their tail fluke. And have you seen that firsthand, that breaching?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
so cool.
Absolutely. I feel very lucky. From the time that I lived in Baja, I saw it daily over the winter, very close to shore, because down by Cabo is one of their birthing and mating grounds, their winter grounds. And a fun fact about breaching is that the amount of energy that they exert when they do a single breach is almost the equivalent of what a human exerts when they run a marathon. Significant amount of energy. And when you think about wild animals,
That's insane.
Yeah, and wild animals generally like to conserve their energy because they are trying to survive in the wild. But with humpback whales, they do these really just spectacular displays of emotion and exuberance, like breaching and fin slapping and all these things. And there's theories as to why they do this, but We don't know exactly why. Some theories are that it's a way of communication with other humpbacks. Some theories that it's just a way for them to play and blow off steam, essentially. So it's quite remarkable to see in person.
How fascinating that you've had such cool encounters and you've seen so many breach before, and the fact that they exert as much energy as someone running a full marathon just by breaching once, that is actually unbelievable. I mean, that's so cool. And you mentioned that they were recently delisted from, I think, threatened to least concern?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a huge deal. So that indicates that the population is now at a healthy level where they're stable, and unless some big event happens, they're not at risk of becoming extinct at this point.
Sure. And that's largely in part to this timeline of events. In 1971, we see the elimination of take in the United States, North American waters, of ending whaling. In 1972, we see the Marine Mammal Protection Act take place, and in the 1980s, the Save the Whales campaign by World Wildlife Fund really helped create a shift in attitudes towards conserving these species. And I mean, how lucky that happened, because you have these amazing encounters, seeing humpback whales breach out of the water. Like, I've only seen that maybe 1 or 2 times, and I'm lucky, but it wasn't even a full breach. And it's so cool how charismatic they are. But great whales don't totally breach that way like the humpback whales, right?
Right. So gray whales are a little awkward. They're kind of stumpy. So when you think about a gray whale and the shape of their body, they kind of project out of the water like the sea pickle that they are, little torpedo log, and they kind of just fall over. And essentially that is what breaching is, and that's what, when whales do breach, that's what it is. But when gray whales do it, it's like very obvious. It's just not very graceful. It's kind of stiff, and it's incredible when you see it because they don't do it that often. But humpback whales, when they breach out of the water, the body structure that they have these long pectoral fins. Their pectoral fin is up to 15 feet long per fin. They propel themselves through the water.
That's insane.
It's huge. Yeah, it's huge. So that gives them the ability to build up power in the water. They come up through the water column and they shoot out like a rocket, but then their body and everything is just incredibly graceful, and they can do this like twisting with their body, and you see their beautiful pectoral fins, and they can bring their body out more than a gray whale can, just because of the structure of their pectoral fin and their fluke, which is their tail. Gray whale's tail, their fluke is a lot smaller, so they just don't have the ability to build up the power that a humpback can.
Fascinating. Thank you for defining those differences, those body differences between the gray whale and the humpback whale, because I was not aware that the gray whale's fins, the pectoral fins, and their fluke are much smaller than that of a humpback, it sounds
Yes.
like. Okay. And
Yeah.
how long did you say the gray whale pectoral fins were?
I'm not entirely
Okay.
sure what that is, but they're
It's more stubby.
proportionate to their body. It is just like,
That's funny. Kind of like a
it's like-
T-Rex.
yeah, they're kind of like a
Kind of
T-Rex.
like a T-Rex with the awkward
Their
arms,
fins
you know?
are really awkward. They're small, so like they're trying to get through the
Right.
water like this. I imagine that's what the whales are doing when they're trying to build up speed.
Right.
But then the humpback has got this extension of
15 feet on either
it's like
side?
They're basically like wings. I have photos of humpback whales from my drone from above when they're resting, and they almost look like an airplane
That's
in the
incredible.
water.
That's so cool. I mean, the fact that we have animals on Earth that are still this massive. We don't have land animals this big because we hunted them to extinction. I mean, or they just went extinct naturally because of the Ice Age and the Pleistocene. That's when we see a lot of large land mammals start to go extinct. Like in Southern California, we have the saber-toothed cat and the bear sloth, or the sloth bear. I don't know where I'm going with this, but anyways, it's really cool. A big ass sloth.
A big sloth.
A big
Yeah.
sloth. But it's cool, like,
Contributed to the creation of Joshua trees.
yes, it did.
Yeah.
It literally
Oh,
did.
no way.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
No, it's really cool. So I just think how magical the ocean is for creating a safe space for such large animals.
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing.
And just to put it into further perspective, A humpback whale can grow between 50 to 60 feet long, and a gray whale can grow between 40 and 60, or give or take 50, let's say 50. I think
Okay.
it's between 40 and 50 feet. So they're massive animals, and they're not even the biggest whales in the ocean.
Right. The blue whales are.
Yes.
Biggest animal on the planet, right?
Yeah, to ever exist.
To ever exist. Well, it's funny because their scientific name has the word mouse in it.
Really?
Scientists did that on purpose. The Latin name for blue whale, I'm not sure if it's the first or the second word in the Latin name, because you know how there are two parts to the name. I think it's the first or the second part. We'll have to fact check that later. But yeah, blue whale literally has, the Latin name has the word mouse in it.
That is so funny. I did
know.
not know that. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
Isn't that funny? I think I learned that in my marine mammals biology class, but it's cool hearing about the differences, and you've seen the differences firsthand in their size, with their flukes, the way they breach, their pectoral fins, short or long. Trying to think of some other cool differences and fun facts. I mentioned earlier the differences between the Odontoceti and the Mysticeti whale families. And Odontocete, I remembered when I was studying for my marine biology tests, we had to understand the whole biological family tree, or the phenology tree, I think. It's been a while, but Odontocetes I always remembered as the toothed whales, because the word odontocete is like orthodontist.
Yeah.
So they're the toothed whales. And then the Mysticetes are the baleen whales, because they have the baleen teeth, so to speak, even though they're not teeth, they're just like long keratin-like plates in their mouth. I think the keratin plates can be up to 10 to 15 inches long.
Oh my gosh.
So each keratin plate, and they have 120 to 180 keratin plates in their mouth, and it sort of looks like a mustache. So Mysticeti, mustache. So when I was studying for my test, I would remember Odontocetes were the toothed whales, Mysticeti, mustache for baleen whales. But anyways, that's just kind of a funny difference, and you know, obviously they have different feeding behaviors, and the gray whale and humpback whales have very different feeding behaviors.
They do.
The gray whale they muzzle the sea floor and the mud for the crustaceans,
Yes.
sometimes leaving behind a pit pattern on the sea floor. And then humpback whales have several different types of foraging behaviors, right?
Right.
Okay, you can speak to that. I'm not super familiar with them. But.
Yeah, so in San Diego waters, we'll see them lunge feeding mainly. So what that means is they'll kind of jump out of the water a little bit and gather up fish in their mouth and then filter it out and swallow the fish. Up in Alaska and I think in Antarctica, they'll do bubble nets. So
Okay,
they'll work
that's right.
together and create these like beautiful structures of bubble nets. And it's almost like a fish net for the fish. They get confused because they don't know where to go. They're surrounded by these bubbles, and the bubbles will surface them also, and then they'll all in unison come up and eat the fish at the same time, which is really, I've never seen that in person.
Magic.
I would love to see that.
Magic.
And then with the gray whales, like you mentioned before, they'll scrape the bottom of the ocean to get the crustaceans mainly and whatever else they eat. And then they filter it that way. That's their primary way of feeding, but when I was in the lagoons, there was some interesting information that the naturalists were sharing about how they're not totally sure that they might do some sort of filter feeding at the surface as well, especially when you think about some of the gray whales don't go to the lagoons in the winter, and they'll just kind of hang out around Baja offshore. I've observed them eating, like scraping the bottom, but then you see some interesting behaviors from the drone where I'm like, are they eating right now?
Interesting.
So, but generally they scoop it off the ground.
I'm loving this conversation, this segment about all these differences between gray whales and humpback whales, because although they're in the same family, the Mysticeti, the baleen whales, they're so different. And you've had so many encounters with gray whales, but what about humpback whales? What has your photography experience been like with that? I know you mentioned that underwater experience with the calf that one time. What other cool stories do you have with humpback whales?
Yeah, I have San Diego stories. I have stories from Hawaii and
Wow.
from Baja. So they're one of my favorite whales. I think a lot of people it's one of their favorite whales as well.
Take us to Hawaii.
Yeah. So I actually just went to Hawaii in February
Oh,
to
cool.
celebrate my birthday. It was my milestone birthday.
Yes.
So we spent a week in February in Hawaii. Hawaii is one of the winter grounds for humpback whales. So humpback whales up in the Antarctic, will either go down to Hawaii or they'll go down to Mexico. And the ones in Hawaii will stay within the channel off of Maui. And one of the reasons why they go there is because the water's so nice and warm and beautiful, first of all.
I've
Like,
never
who doesn't
been.
love that? I know. It's so nice. No wetsuit in the winter. It's great. It's deep enough, but there's also like shallow areas as well for the humpbacks to hang out. And so they'll go there to give birth and mate. During my time in Hawaii this past winter, I could sit on my lanai, and we were right on the channel where the majority of the humpbacks were. People in Hawaii will call it whale soup. It's when it's like the peak of the season and you don't even know where to look because there's so many whales.
What?
So I'm sitting on my lanai watching whales just breaching and just doing all these different behaviors. You can see in the distance heat runs, and I can talk more about what that is, because the other aspect of going to Hawaii was I went on multiple whale watching trips with another ecotourism group.
Ethical viewing
yeah.
guidelines.
Exactly. And just sitting in their rib boat and having these whales all around us, and we're watching whales relaxing early in the morning, and all of a sudden we just see this activity off to the side of the boat, and it's a group of males that are essentially vying for their position with a female to mate. It's called a heat run, and what these heat runs do is they're basically just showing off to the female and chasing her at the same time and demonstrating their ability to do different things. Like, I don't even know everything that they're doing, but a lot of it happens underwater where the males will just like bump into each other, and it can get pretty gnarly, because when you think about humpback whales or any whale in general, they'll have like barnacles and things on their body, so they end up cutting each other and they get battle wounds from these heat runs.
My goodness.
So we're just sitting in the boat watching this heat run that's happening like 50 feet off of the boat, and we're just sitting there watching this happen. And that was, I didn't take any photos or anything at that point. It was too early in the morning, the lighting wasn't good, and I also just wanted to see it happening. I think that was probably one of the coolest things that I've witnessed, besides, their natural activity of breaching and things like that, with my naked eye. And when I think about some of the more special moments that I've captured with humpback whales from my drone, just observing mother and calf resting in the shallow waters off of Mexico, and seeing the mom just, she's taking a nap or whatever, she's just resting, and the baby will rest for a bit, but they don't take as long to rest. So they'll wake up and start swimming around, and they'll do just like a little bit of activity. And it's so cute, because when they know that their mom is about to wake up, they start breaching. Like, the calf will start breaching, because I don't know if they're just excited because
they're
mom's
excited
awake.
mom's waking
Yeah,
up.
and it's just so cute, and just being able to witness that from my drone.
Adorable.
And it's just so special. I have some pretty interesting moments where I've found humpback whales that are just sleeping in the water. Like, you can see their tail at the surface of the water, and they're almost sperm whales will sleep
They'll
vertically.
hang out in the water column.
And
yeah.
I saw a few humpback whales doing that in Mexico this past
That's so interesting.
a couple years ago, and they'll come up every once in a while for a breath, and then they just go back down. So that was pretty cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
My gosh. You probably have a lot of humpback stories.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't.
That's cool. You don't know which one to choose from. That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing and taking us to Hawaii, to Baja, San Diego. We've been everywhere in this episode, and now we just need to all take trips there and go see more animals for ourselves.
Yeah, and humpbacks come through the area every year, and fall time is the best time to see them in San Diego. So
Okay.
if you ever have a chance to go whale
Good to
watching
know.
here, fall is really great for humpbacks. January is really great for gray whales.
Okay.
And then May, June is really great for blue whales.
Speaking of blue whales, it is the beginning of June and end of May. Have you seen any recently?
I have.
Oh my gosh.
I went whale watching last month, and
Okay.
just saw probably in that session there were over 24 blue whales, not close to the boat. Some were near the boat.
How
but
many?
around 24. You could count the spouts on the horizon.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that they've learned that blue whales come to San Diego to feed. So they come in May and June to feed here.
Okay. And what are they feeding on?
They're feeding on one of the smallest creatures of the ocean, krill.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So one of the smallest creatures get eaten by the largest creature in the ocean. And then most recently, what was really crazy is that there were a handful of blue whales really close to shore off of La Jolla just a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Did you see them when they were?
I saw them.
Yeah.
You could see the spout from shore, and then I was able to fly my drone out to them. They have since moved out further into deeper water, but it was insane how close they were because you could see the spouts from shore. And you could even see when they were diving down, you could see them fluke from shore.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I need to bring my binoculars out to do some whale watching from shore. Usually I'm just looking for those oyster catchers.
I know. Gray whales are the most easy to spot from shore just because
Sure.
the way they migrate is so close. They're a near shore or intercoastal species.
Sure.
The blue whales and humpback whales tend to stay offshore,
Okay.
so it's pretty rare for them to come in this close. It might be because of the warmer waters. They were definitely feeding, so their food supply was a little closer to shore. So I think it's just dependent on where the food is that year
Okay.
and where it shifts.
That makes sense. I didn't know that gray whales were considered intercoastal.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
given
they stay
their
within
feeding
about
strategies,
7 miles
Oh,
of shore.
really?
Yeah.
do they go further than 7 miles or?
They will.
Okay.
They'll sometimes go around the channel. Well, I actually don't know how far the Channel Islands are offshore.
Sure.
I think it's like way further than 7 miles, but there's a group that will break off and migrate around the Channel Islands,
Okay.
but most of them stick within 7 miles of shore.
Really?
Yeah, it's really
Wow.
close.
That is really close. It must be related to their feeding behavior if they're searching for crustaceans more than they are for krill. It seems like
Right,
the blue whale and the humpback primarily feed on krill,
right.
and the gray whale has that kind of muzzling feeding behavior where they scrape the sea floor, and that's pretty unique to just the gray whale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to see that blue whale drone footage. You'll definitely have to share that with me and Coral, and next time they're here, let me know so I can check them out from shore. You mentioned that they were the biggest animal in the world. So how big are they in comparison to some of the other whale species that we've talked about?
Yeah, they are the biggest creature ever to exist in the world, including dinosaurs, which could be debatable for some people because there's probably a dinosaur that's close to it. But blue whales can grow around 100 feet. So I don't know how many meters that is, but it's almost incomprehensible how large this animal is.
I'm like, how many football fields is that?
I don't know.
I
how
feel like
many
a
yards-
football field would be like a good reference for how long
Yeah.
a blue whale could be. That's the thing.
Our girl is showing.
Our girl
Yeah,
is
I'm like-
showing.
We don't know.
How many? It's 100 yards. So 100 yards is, a yard is 3 feet or is it 3.3 feet?
Don't ask me. I'm a conservationist, not a mathematician, but
Okay, so a yard is 3 feet and a football field is 100 yards. So it's about a third of the size of a football field.
so imagine 3 football fields side by side, and that's as long as a blue whale. Is that what you're saying?
No, so
Oh.
it's, if you,
I misinterpreted that.
no, yeah. So a blue whale can grow up to around 100 feet. And to put that into perspective, if you think about a football field, that's 100 yards, and a yard is 3 feet each. So a football field is 300 feet long. So a blue whale is 1/3 the size in length of a football field. So you could put 3 blue whales, rostrum to fluke, so nose to tail, and that would make up the length of a football field. Just 3 blue whales.
Wait, are we sure that's right? Because I think a blue whale, I don't know. Now I feel like I swear I've seen like a picture of a human on a scale with a blue whale compared
Yeah.
to like a football field. Because I think a blue whale is longer than a football field.
No,
Or no, you're saying it's a third the size.
yeah.
I shouldn't have even brought it up. Coral's like,
So-
you stupid hoe. Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is unbelievable though.
I know, I like literally just can't even. Okay,
So they're about the size of, if you
Three
think of,
school bus
yeah, 3
lengths.
school buses.
Okay, that's better than a football field because
Yeah.
I'm fucking that up. So, so blue whales are huge.
Yeah.
It's insane how big blue whales are. Like I literally cannot comprehend the fact that they are 100 feet long. So not only are blue whales massive, but they are also incredibly blue. What does that color look like? Is it like a darker pigmentation or lighter? Does that color change across their body?
Yeah, so their skin is like this beautiful, it's like a silver color when you look at it from above. And when they're out of the water, it's like this grayish silver color. Because when they go under the water and on a really sunny day, they just like glow beneath the surface. But do they get their name because their skin is actually blue, or is it because of how it looks when it's underwater?
That's a good point because we were just talking about this on one of our more recent episodes about
Yeah.
orcas, that they appear to be black and white, but they are actually kind of have these purpley undertones. So I'm wondering
Oh, yeah,
what
yeah,
that
yeah.
would be like for blue whales. Are we seeing them as blue because of the way the light refracts underwater, or how they're different on the surface when you see them? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have the specific answer to that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
We don't know all the answers,
Yeah.
but I'm mostly just curious about other types of fun facts that we can share with our listeners. They're huge, they're blue, and beautiful. What else is cool about them?
Their heart is about the size of a car, so I think it's like a Volkswagen, like a Volkswagen Beetle.
What?
Right? Yeah, their heart is the size of a Volkswagen Beetle.
Holy shit.
And
That's crazy.
What else? They have,
Wow, I was not expecting that.
yeah, they have incredibly small throats for the size of their body. So I think their throat is only a few inches wide. It may be up to like 2 feet, but
Wow.
I know a lot of people that might have a fear of the ocean or worried about getting swallowed by whales. Most baleen whales, if not all, and especially the blue whale, their throats are just too small for that to even be possible.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I had no idea that their heart was literally the size of a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Little, like a punch buggy Volkswagen. That's
Yes.
insane.
Another interesting fact is, just like any other whale, you can identify the specific whale by its fluke, so their tail. So if you can get a really good picture of a blue whale tail and upload it to a place called Happy Whale,
That's
you can
right.
learn about what
That's
that
cool.
whale is, and that's true for other whale species as well.
Cool. So, in your experience documenting blue whales, gray whales, and humpback whales, have you been able to contribute some of those photos as an identification for Happy Whale? It's sort of like a citizen science thing.
I have not done that yet.
That's okay.
And I always have that on my to-do list, but it's just kind of,
Well, it's cool that there's an opportunity for your photos to contribute to something like that. And I know
Yeah.
you do tons of other citizen science, and your photography has gone to amazing places and reached so many audiences. So I feel like the Happy Whale thing is, if you have the time to do it. But
Yeah.
you're out there in the field collecting these experiences and photographs, which is enough in itself. I mean, that's just taking the extra step, but that's really cool. So speaking of citizen science, what are some local efforts that your photography has contributed to for conservation research?
this was really exciting for me. A few years ago, I worked with CSU Shark Lab, so California State University Shark Lab, to help them collect data for one of the studies that a grad student was overseeing at the time. And the white shark nursery that is near here, how frequent there were close encounters between humans in the water and white sharks in the water, and what types of interactions they were having. Were they like neutral, aggressive, positive, things like that. So I worked with grad student Patrick Rex to help him collect data over the summer of 2021. He walked me through his protocol. So protocol is essentially a guideline for how I should be collecting the data. It was specific, this was with my drone. So how high I should be flying, what angle my camera should be at, and behaviors to record, essentially. So I spent the summer early mornings a few times a week collecting data for him. And last year, the paper that he was working on was released, talking about the interactions between humans and white sharks and the prevalence and all that fun stuff. I won't go into the details of too much on that, but what was really exciting to me is that I ended up being acknowledged in the paper as a citizen scientist contributor for collecting data.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I had originally reached out to Chris Lowe, who oversees the CSU Shark Lab, a couple years before this even happened, because I knew he is a huge shark scientist, and I was like, have you seen the sharks in Del Mar? And he's like, of course. But just based on that, because I was just so excited when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, like, are people aware of this? Because this is when I was still kind of new to the space. And I think just from that specific interaction, that helped keep me top of mind for him to reach out to me to help with this paper.
That's incredible. Congratulations again on a really great recognition and effort. I mean, the Chris Lowe Shark Lab is very well known in Southern California, and to contribute to that must just feel so good.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's just a good feeling, knowing that your data is contributing to something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. Yes, it's really fun to find opportunities like that where, even though there's definitely like the passion that I have is very like self-fulfilling in itself.
Of course.
Being able to have my work impact beyond just myself and a wider audience is
Right.
another aspect that's fulfilling.
I agree, and that's something I can definitely relate to. And when you have passion the way that we do, the way that Planet People does, the way that we share here, it's something that feels contagious, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want to keep that to yourself. And knowing that it can go beyond yourself, like you were saying, there's just something so impactful about that, and influential and important, and like what you're doing matters. When you share those moments, it's like, this isn't just for me, it's for other people to know and to educate and to learn and to be inspired by. And I am definitely inspired by your citizen science effort, and I think it's so cool that you got to do that. And it's important. Well, in addition to your Shark Lab experience, what other types of citizen science effort have you been lucky enough to contribute your work to?
When I lived in Baja, I was able to volunteer at a sea turtle organization that basically had a hatchery. So they collected sea turtle eggs after they had been nested on the beach and brought them to a safe and secure spot so that the eggs could incubate and increase the success rate of hatchlings. So I would oversee the hatchery, the nursery area essentially, and every 20 minutes, 20 minutes, you go in there to check to see if any of them have hatched, and then you have to bring them out to another area because it's too hot in the nursery for them to be able to be out of the nest, and then helping with the releases in the evening. So it was a lot of fun. It was a very, surprisingly, I thought it would be, not that I thought it was gonna be easy, I thought it would be more chill than it was. But then you're like checking every like 15 to 20 minutes the temperature in the hatchery, and you're just outside in the beating sun. You have some shade, but you're just like, so it was a little bit more intense than I had expected. But I think the exciting thing about that is that when you think about sea turtles and how they nest and their behaviors from when they hatch and then leave, and then when they go to nest again, sea turtles will return to the beach that they hatched from to lay their own eggs. So I think by the time they're in their teens and their 20s is when they start returning back to lay their eggs. And these organizations in Baja have been doing this work for the last 15, 20 years. So now in the next couple of years, they're expecting to start seeing some of the turtles that they've initially helped release into the ocean to come back to nest. One of the craziest things I learned about sea turtles when I was doing this is that their success rate from when they're born to maturity is 1 in 1,000 of these turtles will
It's a
make
very
it.
low success
It's
rate.
very low, yeah. So that's one of the reasons why these organizations started in Baja, and they're very much run by local citizens. It's a grassroots effort. They all kind of do their own thing, but at the end of the day, they're all trying to achieve the same result, which is increasing the sea turtle population and helping to protect the sea turtles.
Conservation in action.
Yep.
That's really fun that you were able to be, again, boots on the ground and see how this conservation effort can take place in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And every 15 to 20 minutes you were checking, right?
Right, yeah, all day. It's basically just making sure that once they come out, you can get them so they don't suffer in the heat.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yep. That's incredible.
Yeah.
You've had some really incredible stories and experiences, and thank you so much for sharing all of your stewardship efforts, and contributing to these citizen science efforts can really, again, like I said, be fulfilling. And you're going the distance, quite literally. You're traveling to these places and you're capturing these experiences, photos, and going beyond just harboring those experiences and keeping them to yourself. You're sharing these stories with your own audience, with the National Geographic's audience, Apple TV audiences, with the CSU Shark Lab, and now with Planet People. And we're so happy that we get to share your story as a part of our mission. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Of course, I was so excited when you reached out.
That's so sweet.
Everything like what you're doing is exactly what I'm doing, but just in a different way.
Yes.
And it's all about showing people that you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be formally trained in this to care or even make an impact in conservation. I mean, this is a passion project of mine. I have a full-time job that's not related to marine sciences in any way, and it's one of those things that I'm really excited to be able to share with people and get people excited about as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I can feel the excitement. I feel excited about this conversation, about our ethos crossing paths. I think the stars aligned for a reason, and yeah, we can show people together the difference that any planet person can make in taking those stewardship actions and inspiring hope. I mean, we need hope. We need that inspiration so that people know that they too can partake in those actions.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite quote you want to share with our audience?
I do. I'm going to have to reference it.
Yes.
Because I don't want to butcher it. So one quote that I find really inspiring that I think is really relevant, and I think anybody can relate to this quote, is a quote by Sylvia Earle. And it goes something like this: "Even if you've never had the chance to see or touch the ocean, it touches you with every breath you take, every drop of water you drink, every bite you consume. Everyone, everywhere is inextricably connected to and utterly dependent upon the existence of the sea." And it's so true. Like, we are so dependent on the oceans, and it impacts everything about our life, whether we see it or not.
That's a beautiful quote.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so powerful and inspiring, and I love her repetition with the every breath we take, every drop in the ocean, every bite we eat. It's like, oh my gosh, like you just feel that like deep connection with every breath you take. Like, just think about that. You know, planet, ocean.
Yes.
Thank you. Wow. It's a beautiful quote. And Sylvia Earle is an icon. She's like the Jane Goodall of the ocean.
Yes, yeah.
Like Jane Goodall is primates, Sylvia Earle, all things ocean.
Exactly.
A true legend of her time.
Yes.
I mean, I'm so glad you referenced her. Truly.
Yeah, it's
Cool.
such a great quote.
Well, as we wrap up the episode, we always like to give our listeners the opportunity to find you and connect with you beyond the Planet People page in the podcast. So where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, I mainly post on Instagram. My handle is @headedanywhere, or just headed anywhere. I also have my website, which is headedanywhere.com. I'm on TikTok, same handle, and those are the primary places I post. I do have a YouTube channel as well,
Cool.
but I have neglected it for quite some time. But I do have some longer form videos on there. But Instagram, TikTok, and my blog.
Awesome. What's the name of your blog? Headed Anywhere as well?
Headedanywhere.com. Yeah.
Do you update it with regular posts or from time to time? Yeah.
I'd say about quarterly if I'm lucky.
Sure.
I do sell my photography online as well, which
Cool.
you can find from there.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would love to support you.
Yeah. Generally, I've done a lot of donations
That's
of my
cool.
photos for organizations. I most recently donated a couple prints to Wild Coast.
Cool. Yeah.
And they had this past weekend like a fundraiser auction event. So it was 2 of their items for their silent auction.
Oh, that's
So it's
amazing. Do you know how much it sold for?
They in total raised $300, I think.
That's great.
Yeah.
Another reason to put yourself out there and find ways your photography contribute to conservation. I mean, that money goes back into the ocean,
Yes.
essentially, right?
Yes.
So another thing that aligns with your ethos, which is great.
Yeah.
I love the different ways that your photography has impacted different audiences from, the National Geographic, like we said, the CSU Shark Lab, just so many different outlets for you to put your passion to the test and feel fulfilled.
Yes.
I mean, it just keeps getting better with every story. I'm very impressed. You're doing an awesome job.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's evolved over a very long period of time and really just trying to keep things aligned with where I want it to be and my values and
Sure.
feeling like I am doing it in a way that just makes me not feel like
Taking photos.
taking photos and
No,
taking
you have an
advantage of
ethos.
the wildlife. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I know what you mean. Sometimes it feels like, especially here in La Jolla, when I see people take photos of the marine mammals, it almost feels exploitive,
Yeah.
right? But when you have an ethos behind it where your mission is for conservation and stewardship, then only good things can come from that because you're giving back, and there's so much value in that. So remember that when you take photos. Don't ever think that it's for, like, I don't know, for clout or something. And there's definitely those type of people online, and you're on Planet People for a reason. So remember
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You are a steward of the earth, and
Yes.
your photography can educate people and fundraise and be a citizen science effort. And it's evolving. What are some things you're looking forward to next that you can share with our audience? Some exciting projects in the works, for example.
Yeah, I do have a handful of projects in the works. I can't speak to specifics on those quite
Oh.
yet, but mainly around my drone work and drone videos. There's a couple different things that I have going on, but
Cool.
like I said, I can't
Right.
divulge.
Sure. Is it around photographing the same animals we've talked about in this episode, or different species?
Similar, yeah.
Okay.
It's documentaries and then also some additional work with local organizations.
Oh, cool.
It's very preliminary, so
Sure.
we'll just keep it at the things in the works
Sure.
stage.
Well, we're really excited to see what comes next for you, and we'll just keep our listeners wanting more in the meantime. Then they'll just have to tune into your Instagram page and follow along with your adventures as you head anywhere else in the world.
Thanks, I really appreciate it. It was a blast
thank
being
you.
here.
Of course, we're happy to have you. Looking forward to the next conversation. I'm sure this is the first of many.
Yes.
Cool. Look at the little bunny.
I know, we're surrounded by nature.
I love it. I don't care how much of a pest these animals are. They're so freaking cute.
I know.
They're
I
not a
wish I
pest
didn't
in my
like-
mind.
I don't think they're pesky. I wish I
Little bunny.
didn't know how bad it is to feed wildlife.
I know,
because
right?
I would love to feed.
I know. my toxic trait is that I just want to feed all animals.
Yeah.
Have them come up to me and pretend like I'm Cinderella.
Yeah.
But
Come to
Oh.
me.
come to me. Okay.
Now let's really start.
Okay.
We have made it, you guys.
Yay!
2 hours later.
Yeah.
2 hours later.
All right.
Let me just take a little swig. Little liquid courage here.
Yeah, cleanse the palate.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Planet People. We are thrilled to have you as part of our community of wildlifers who care about protecting the planet for future generations to enjoy. We hope that by listening to this podcast, you'll be inspired to connect with nature and become a steward of the planet by getting involved and taking action with your local community conservation organization. Until next time, stay positive, Planet People. Thank you to my team here at Planet People. This episode was produced by Natalie Jane Sybil, Coral Carson, and Hugh Carr. Edited by Coral Carson. Theme song by Hugh Carr under the artist name Flama. Thank you, team.